Hello, implementers. I'm Anthony English, and this is episode 19 of the Learn to Implement podcast, where you will learn how to manage perfectionism, how to beat procrastination, and how to implement some of those many ideas that you've got swirling around your head. Now, I've got a question for you. Imagine that you have got a colleague in your work who is super productive, really good. Let's give this colleague a name. It's a man. His name is Jim, and Jim is really good at pretty much everything. He's got his finger on the pie. He's just got his finger in many different pies, and he can really answer pretty much any question. He's been there quite a few years at your job and at the company, and he is really the go-to person for almost everything. You know somebody like that, right? And Jim is really very helpful as well. Very curious, a keen learner. Would listen to this Learn to Implement podcast and would just say, well, yeah, you should be implementing. As soon as you've got an idea, put it into practice. And so that's Jim, really the person that everybody relies on. If there's a bottleneck, if there's a challenge, if there's a blockage of some kind, if there is some process that is kind of hitting an obstacle, then just ask Jim is the solution. But one time Jim is away. He's a super hard worker. He has it seems to be always on call, always on the phone, always there to help. But Jim has been called away. It's a family emergency. And because of the nature of the emergency, Jim can't even be contacted by phone, by text message. You don't have any passwords. You've got to have life without Jim. You can imagine that might happen. Not because Jim is slacking off or because he's left the company, but simply because he is unavoidably and suddenly unavailable. Now what happens? Well, if you were to ask Jim beforehand, I mean, Jim's a humble guy, but if you were to ask him, or maybe to ask colleagues, they would say this place would fall apart without him around. Now, what happens when Jim is not around? Because that can happen, and you know it. It can happen for all kinds of reasons. Yes, there could be a falling out. There could be a reason that Jim is leaving the company altogether, or simply he's just called away unavoidably for a few weeks even. So what happens? I'll tell you what happens. Nothing happens. Well, maybe not nothing. But the only things that continue to happen are the things that can run without him, that can run without Jim. Now, what about you? You're going to be stuck. I wish I could just pick his brain. I wish I could just call him. I wish he had things better documented. I wish he had things automated. Jim, although he's a very helpful guy, hasn't done that many favors by keeping everything in his head, by being the single point of failure, as we call it in the tech world. If things are going to fail, they're going to fail because everything, maybe not everything, but many things need to go through Jim. So, what are you going to do about that? What about you? What things in your life, if you were to take a month away without doing anything, what things would still run without you? If you were to be lazy, if you were to go on holidays, if nobody could contact you, what would run without you? Well, a few things would happen. You're going to be getting bills still keep coming in because they can keep coming in without you. Maybe you've got things on auto pay, and so that's still going to happen without you. Maybe you've got some income flowing in from an investment or some passive income. I have a YouTube channel, and that brings me in $300-400 US every month. And even if I don't put anything on the YouTube channel, that money is still pretty consistent. For a while, it would be fairly consistent. I've got also some Amazon things that do pretty much the same. Once again, about $300 US a month. So that would still keep coming unless something intervenes, unless I cancel it, or Amazon or YouTube or something changes, moves the goalposts. Now, what happens in your life? What can happen when you're running on low energy? Well, the things that are going to happen, the things that will happen, are the things that are going to happen that can happen without a lot of effort on your part. You're still going to eat. You're still going to sleep. You're still going to do some things that are going to happen, not necessarily without you, but because they are dependent on, because you've got the habits there in place already. So here is a good way to deal with your procrastination and your perfectionism and just those ideas that just never get implemented, is ask yourself. You could even write down a list of 10, 20, 50 things you could probably write down. These things would happen if I do nothing different. Yes, there could be, you could have a flood or a fire. You could have something come in to intervene to break the cycle. But at the moment, there are plenty of things that are just going to keep happening. Now, some of those things are good things. Some of them are on the positive and some are on the negative. But the reality is that some things are going to keep happening. Well, guess where this is going? If you've got a habit, if you've got some habits in place, they're fairly likely to keep going, especially if they're deeply ingrained habits. You know how to get dressed in the morning. Now, that habit is not going to change. You're not going to get rid of that. You know how to speak English. That's not going to change. Unless there's some catastrophe, that is, you're still going to be able to keep that up. So let's bank on those still happening. Now, what about some other things? I'll tell you some other things that might still happen. Things that you have got automated. If you are spending a lot of time paying bills, for example, that's probably something that you can automate. And if you can automate it, that's less effort on your part. That's still going to happen. And that's less stress in your mind. That's less of a strain and thinking, oh, that's right, I need to remember to do this or that. And so where I'm headed with this is to focus on 1, 2, 3 things that you can do, that you can automate, or you can turn into habits, or you can stop doing altogether. In other words, things that can run without you or without much effort on your part. And so that is your homework for this week. What runs without me already, and what could run without me or without much effort if only I did X or Y. Maybe there are some things that you say, I don't even need to do this anymore. I don't even need to do this at all. What can run without you? There's your mission for this coming week until the next episode. Thanks again for listening to the Learn to Implement podcast. We'll see you next time.